This video will take you through the steps needed to calculate the effect size of your intervention, enabling you to understand the size of the impact the intervention has had on the outcome you've measured. An effect size is a measure of the size of difference between the two groups in a DIY evaluation, generally a treatment group and a control group. And by looking at an effect size, we can see not only if the intervention works or not, but also see how well it works. In order to calculate the effect size for your intervention, you first need to make sure that you have all of the scores from your outcome measure in a list like this. And you can see in my sheet here, I've created two tabs down at the bottom, a treatment group and a control group. And for each, I've simply entered the score that each child achieved on the outcome measure. So having put the data into a list like this for each of the groups, I'm going to minimize this sheet and open the effect size calculator. For the sake of clarity, I suggest that you use a new effect size calculator for each intervention that you conduct and evaluate. That way, you'll be able to keep the data for each one separate from the others and hopefully prevent confusion. Remember to save the spreadsheet on your computer. You might want to rename it so that it includes the name of the intervention you've evaluated. For the moment, we're not going to concern ourselves with these three coloured sections here because we need to import the data first. So what we're going to look at are the two tabs at the bottom here, the treatment group and control group tabs. If I select the treatment group tab for a start, you'll see that we've got a column ready for data entry. And if I go back over now to my outcome measure sheet and select the treatment group, I can then select all of the data in that column and copy it. I'll return now to the effect size calculator and ensure that I've got the treatment group tab selected, and then I'm going to paste those scores in there. And you can see when I do that this cell is populated with the standard deviation, which is simply a way of measuring the spread of scores from the mean within this set of values. So having done that for the treatment group, I'm now going to select the control group tab at the bottom here and then return to my outcome measures sheet. I'm going to go to the control group now and select all of the data here and copy it. And if I return to the effect size calculator, make sure I've got control group tab selected there and I can paste the data in. And once again we get a measure of the spread of the data with our standard deviation here. So having done that, I'm just going to save the sheet now. And now I'm going to come down here and click on the calculator tab. And you can see now that the cells in this row here have been populated, but before we look at those, I'm going to put a label in for my outcome measure. In this case, it's a PIPS reading test. So having done that, let's have a look at the values. For the treatment group, we can see that the mean score was 54.17 and there were 24 children in the class. And the scores that were achieved had a standard deviation of 1.46. In the control group, the mean score was 52.83, there were 24 children in the class, and the scores had a standard deviation of 1.37. To the right in purple are a set of raw difference scores that for the purposes of this exercise we're going to ignore. And we're going to have a look only at the standardized effect size information. In particular, the bias corrected effect size of 0.92 that we see here indicates that our intervention had a positive effect. Over here to the right we can see the confidence interval for that effect size with a lower limit of 0.33 and an upper limit of 1.52. And these data are very useful in interpreting our effect size, but it's perhaps more useful to think about it graphically. So if we go to the bottom here and select the graph tab, we can now see our data represented graphically. And interpreting this graph is a simple exercise. The effect size that we saw on the calculator sheet is represented by this diamond here. It's also down here in our table along with the confidence interval limits. And any effect size which is greater than 0 represents a positive effect, indicating that, on average, children in the treatment group performed better than those in the control group. Anything below 0 indicates that children in the treatment group performed, on average, worse than those in the control group. And it's worth noting that a traditional test of statistical significance would say that a result whose confidence interval does not pass through the 0 line is a statistically significant one. So on here, because our lower confidence limit does not pass through 0, we can say that our result is statistically significant. So the 0.92 effect size that we see here is a pleasing and positive one, but we must also take into account the confidence intervals. Stretching from 0.33 up to 1.52, this confidence interval shows us the plausible range of values we could expect to see were we to repeat the experiment with the same group. It's worth remembering that estimates from small groups of children are less precise than those from larger samples, and as such, with just this small number of children, the confidence intervals are large. It's also worth keeping both the context of the evaluation and the confidence intervals around the effect size in mind when discussing and making decisions based on your DIY evaluation data.